Failure is not an option. How many times have you heard it? However, even the best have failed. This is Fail, Inspiring Resilience, where we celebrate stories of vulnerabilities, failure is not an option, and strength. How many times have exceptional people to create a more resilient society? Even the best have failed. This is Fail, Inspiring Resilience, where we celebrate stories of vulnerabilities, failure is not an option, and strength. Inspiring resilience, where we celebrate stories of vulnerability, failure is not an option.
Failure is not an option. What happened? Did somebody help me? It used to work half an hour ago. What if it used to work half an hour ago?
Failure is not an option. How many times have you heard it? However, even the best have failed. This is Fail, Inspiring Resilience, where we celebrate stories of vulnerabilities, failure is not an option, and strength. How many times have you heard it? People to create a more resilient society, have failed. Because failure is indeed not an option. It is required. Inspiring resilience, where we celebrate stories of vulnerabilities, failure is not an option, and strength. How many times have you heard it? People to create a more resilient society, have failed. Because failure is indeed not an option. It is required. Inspiring resilience, where we celebrate stories of vulnerabilities, failure is not an option, and strength. How many times have you heard it? People to create a more resilient
Evening. There you go. Welcome to Fail, everybody. We like to make everyone feel comfortable by. I'm waiting for that girl to start talking behind me again. But yeah, welcome to Fail. I'm Kirsty. Welcome to the bottom half of my face, which not many people have seen for a while. I don't know, not everyone will know this, but we actually had an event scheduled for late March 2020. And it was all booked and planned, and everyone was going to come. And as the weeks rolled on, we were thinking about like how we could still do it. We could limit the number of people in the room. Maybe we would just have the speakers. And then, reality set in. But while we couldn't meet in person, Fail kept going. If you check out Fail's YouTube channel, there is a whole plethora of events and talks and interviews that took place in the past year and a half, so check that out. Now, as you kind of saw behind me, Fail has a new visual identity and a new look. And this wasn't the launch that it deserved because the people at Fail have worked so hard over the past year to make this real. We want to give a special mention to Elisa, whose master's thesis was this rebrand, and she did an amazing job. So thank you, Elisa. So while Fail has a new face, the meaning of what Fail is has not changed at all. We're about finding the strength and meaning in failure. Like, we live in a society that prizes success above all else and often ignores or pushes away the idea that successful people have failures in their wake. So what we do in this room and on our online events is make space for those failures. So today, you're going to hear 4 speakers talk about times they failed and what they took from it. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A so you can submit your questions and we can ask them straight out. Please, if you haven't already, turn off or put on airplane mode your phones. Okay, I always like to kick off these events by talking about something from my life, like one of the adventures I've been having in my life. And I was really struggling with what I was going to say to you all today because I haven't had many adventures or much life over the past couple of years. It's been rough. And I feel like when the pandemic kicked in, there was 2 types of people. There was the people who were always alone in their apartments, and there was the people who were never alone in their apartments. And I was in the never alone bucket. I was with my husband in our very small apartment in Cambridge with our 3-year-old son, a 10-week-old baby, 2 full-time jobs, and no childcare. And it was rough. And before we had kids, my husband and I were what you call outdoorsy people. Like, we like to camp, we like to hike, we like to ski, and this is one of the reasons I love living where I live. But we'd had a kid, and I swore this was never going to happen to me, but I'd become one of those people that started to build their weekends around what he wanted to do. Because if you have a 3-year-old in your life, you'll know that if they're having a good time, you are usually also having a better time. And so our weekends were like play dates and indoor play places and playgrounds, and there's a theme here, and going to get pancakes at the diner, which I also liked, but it was all about him. And then overnight, all of those things were gone. We couldn't even meet his friends at the playground. And also around this time, these memes started appearing on the internet that were like, it would be like a picture of the woods with like sunlight streaming through the trees, and it would say, "Outside isn't cancelled." Or there would be like a glacial lake with a mountain and a sunset, and it would be like, "Nature isn't cancelled." And I was like, do you know what, meme? You are right. We are going to go on a hike. And I just never took my kid on a hike because I thought that he wouldn't like it. And so we set off and we go to the Middlesex Fells. It's April. It's still really cold. And we wrap everyone up in like hats and gloves and scarves, and we set off on this walk. And do you know what? He hated it. He hated it. He hated every minute of it. He whined and he was annoying, and like he lay in the dirt and he kicked his feet and he wanted snacks, and it was a total failure. It was miserable. I've always gone for the path of least resistance with him, and this was not it. And we get back in the car and everyone is cold and tired and grumpy, and we go home and it was just a miserable day. And then something else happened. Over the next few days, I realized I feel better. I really took something from that walk in the woods. It didn't matter that someone was yelling about Cheez-Its the time we were in the woods. Like, I was in the woods. And so I announced that we are going to go for a hike every weekend. The other thing the pandemic brought out for me was what I like to call 18th century thrills. It's where you start to appreciate things that you took for granted before. Like, if you imagine like a Jane Austen 1790s novel kind of thing, like, people would walk down the street and they'd bump into someone they'd know and they'd be genuinely thrilled to see them, because you didn't see that many people around. And that's how it was with my neighbors. Like, I would bump into them on the street and we would greet each other as if we just crossed an ocean. Like, oh my God, so good to see you. Like, how are you holding up? Like, it felt special and I took joy in it. And here's the thing about nature, it's full of 18th century thrills. And so over the next 6 or 7 weeks, we go hiking every weekend, and there's a lot of whining. But I also see the seasons start to change. I see tadpoles grow legs. I see leaves come out. I see flowers bloom. And on one particularly magical day, I see a duck with like this little row of ducklings behind her, and the sun is like glinting off the pond that she's swimming in, and it was majestic. And so another Saturday rolls around. We pack up the car, we drive to a state park. There's a lot of whining on the way. And by this point, we're like well-oiled machines at hiking with 2 kids. Like, I strap on the baby, and I take off down the path, and my husband's just locking the car behind me. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there was this whoosh, goes past me. And it's this blur of purple. And it's my son in his purple jacket. And he says, "Yay, it's the woods." And we had the most amazing day. We found worms, we found bugs, we raced down the path together. It was magical. And at one point he said, "Mommy, mommy, mommy, mommy." And I ran over like, what is it? And he's like, "Look, there's a spider spinning a web." It was the most 18th century thrill you can imagine. And it really was like a 1790s childhood, right down to the fact that there was the rampant spread of an infectious disease throughout the entire community. And here's the thing, if it wasn't for the pandemic, I wouldn't have kept going back. It wasn't the path of least resistance, it was hard. And it was a strange and weird silver lining in what was a really, really tough year. And it gave my husband and I back a little bit of the people we used to be before we had kids. And it was a reminder that sometimes it's worth taking the most difficult path because it just might have a spider spinning a web on it. Thank you. That is enough from me. I'm going to introduce our first speaker tonight. Now, we know these people have amazing resumes and really interesting stories behind them. So to introduce them, I asked them all a question. And that question is, what is one thing that's on your resume, not on your resume, that we should know about you? When I asked David Edwards this question, he said, "I love to sail alone at sea, offshore, for days on end." Please welcome David Edwards.
Thank you so much, and it's really lovely to be here to talk about failure. Actually, I've never talked about failure before explicitly, although we fail all the time, obviously. Let me just begin with a little bit of success, or at least how I began my career. I actually began here working with Howard Brenner, who probably not many people remember, but applied math in chemical engineering and wrote a couple books early on, which led me to meet Bob Langer, who gave me a few papers that reviewed inhaled insulin, which was a big thing back in the middle 1990s. We published an article that showed how you could deliver insulin through the lungs, through wiffle ball-like particles that allowed you to use very simple inhalers. And that we published in Science, and that led to a company which we sold really quickly in the late 90s. And so after that, I came and started to teach at Harvard University, and the 9/11, of course, happened, and then the Anthrax Scare, which some of you may remember. Because I had, in a way, weaponized insulin, I was brought to Washington to kind of figure out how to prevent people from weaponizing anthrax, and that led to an observation that if you put salt in the airways, you got rid of these little respiratory droplets that people at the time didn't really know what to think about those droplets, but we hear a lot about them now. And we published that in PNAS, and then I started a company, and I became funded by the Gates Foundation, and I was kind of at the most successful moment of my career. On the other hand, I'm about to tell you about a big failure. And the reality was that I didn't feel so successful. And the reason is that, well, I'm going to tell you about a moment when I was in South Africa. We had started a not-for-profit in South Africa called MEND to bring inhaled antibiotics for TB and also an inhaled BCG vaccine for TB to a market, so to speak. I knew that that would never happen, actually. The markets really didn't exist in Africa for that. We were doing experiments in Africa on people for whom we really couldn't bring products, and that seemed really wrong to me. I had done really well with my first company and then my second company, but it hadn't really led to the change that my papers promised that it would, or that grants that I wrote, or articles that were written about me. I really hadn't done any of that, and so I felt pretty false. And in that context, a friend of mine who ran the not-for-profit in South Africa, in Pretoria, put me in the car and said, I'm going to show you some of the villages that we I thought we might help, and I had just no clue of how people were living outside in the bush country in the northern parts of South Africa. And I came across this scene, and it really struck me, and I obviously took a picture. And these people were leaving trash in the bush country. They didn't really look at us. It was clearly something that was just pretty commonly done. And it struck me for many, many reasons. Number one, those products, the packaging of which they were tossing into the countryside, looked like products like I might have kind of created. And they probably solved problems, or at least brought benefits to people that made them want to buy those. These people who invented these things probably did well. There was a phenomenon going on in Africa at the time where the infectious diseases that I had come thinking I might help address were being accompanied by a lot of diseases that were sort of developed world diseases, cardiovascular disease and mental health issues, and diseases that were kind of brought on by products like the ones that were being tossed, the refuse in the countryside. And so in a way, this was illustrative of what I felt I was doing with my career. I was bringing sort of a short-term benefit to some people, but in the long term, it was really the opposite. And that really was very hard to deal with. And so I kind of had a big existential moment. Now, I want to say about failure that once you leave school, of course, failure in school feels like the end. But once you leave school, failure is like your best teacher, right? So the word teacher's not there. But if you're doing something new, and hopefully all of you will do something new when you leave. In fact, it's really hard today not to go off and do something new that nobody has quite done before. And if that's the case, then every step you take, there's always a good probability you're taking a wrong step. And actually, the wrong steps are the ones that teach you. The steps that kind of brought you where you thought you were supposed to be probably don't teach you anything. And so people who are pioneering tend to pay really close attention to failure. They do it a lot. They do it so much they don't even think about it. And then these are all sort of catalysts to learning. So that's not what I'm talking about right now. There's kind of the big F word. Okay, so this is a big failure. And that is like you've been pioneering and making little mistakes, but kind of climbing the hill. And then you realize like you're on the wrong hill. There's something just, this is not the right place to be at all. And that can happen. And that is, of course, just a big moment of questioning. And it was for me. And it led me to leave the United States. And my colleagues were really flexible at Harvard. And I went from 100% to 50% and then 25%. And I moved to Paris, and my wife is French, and that worked for her. And why? So of course, the internet was kind of becoming a big thing back then. Most of you were like maybe not even born then, but at the time it was really transforming the world. And what was happening with the internet was that suddenly people like me were creating with everybody else. And there was this big conversation going on, and it was leading to really surprising change because everybody's talking about it, right? This was kind of a co-creation. And that wasn't happening in my material world, certainly not in my pharmaceutical healthcare world. And I wanted to create with other people. I felt like I could probably figure out what the problems were, but I wasn't convinced that I or anybody really knew how to solve those problems in ways that were not regulated. In other words, ways that would be just kind of changing how people think and live. I didn't think I knew how to do that. And I was kind of not convinced anybody did. And so I needed to be in a conversation. And that felt to me like a cultural conversation. And so I opened a cultural center in Paris called the Laboratoire, where we did experiments with artists and designers at Frontiers of Science. And so we created new things, and they were so kind of far out that they didn't seem very practical, and it was pretty successful contemporary art and design space, and we created new works that ended up in museum collections and all of that. And we started some companies, and pretty far out companies, and they kind of grouped into two groups around edible packaging and inhaled food. And there were a couple really enlightened VC firms here in the United States that invested, Polaris and Flagship, kind of took a big risk. These were very unusual kinds of things, and we kind of felt like we knew where these things were going. But the reality, we really didn't. And so I came back, and I opened a laboratoire not far from here at MIT. And so this is me, and this is what most pioneers do. But normally, you're doing it with your colleagues who've like climbed mountains. Right? And so you're kind of budding with people who know what they're doing. And I was now in this place where like investors were doing things that wouldn't normally do. And I was also with people. We're all kind of like doing this thing together. And so there's a lot of like double, multiplying my risk here. And I was having fun. It was actually very helpful to have Kirsty talk about her failing and having fun at it. It was pretty fun, but it wasn't really leading to what I had hoped. It might not just be really concrete. What I had done over those years is I had been exploring bringing health to people through the air in non-regulated markets. And so inhaled food and inhaled drinks, and then digital scent, and working with really great designers and chefs who helped beautify the experimental process. I've become really convinced that in engaging your audience with something that's really new, you need to sort of dignify that experience, because there's no promise that that's going to bring a lot of benefit. And anyway, we learned a lot. And what happened was that the spring of, and I should mention this last object here was a nimbus, which was starting to get a lot of resonance in the food industry. And you could create, and we still do, you create clouds of flavor over any drink, and you change it. So water with like raspberry was like raspberry water, or if you have water with wine over it, it's wine. And even though you're just drinking water, your brain tells you you're drinking wine. And so you can play with the metabolism for various benefits, but it was still a pretty niche concept. So SARS-CoV-2 happens, and suddenly people are talking about respiratory droplets again. And now it's actually like in the New York Times, and so people like really are talking about it. And so I, with Bob Langer, approached the FDA, and Bob at one point was the head of the scientific advisory board, and so we spoke to Janet Woodcock, who leads the drug division, and we said that, maybe delivering these salts to the nose, you could get them right here. And it seemed to me that these respiratory drops might be right here, and you might be able to kind of clean these away and have a significant impact on the COVID pandemic. And why would that matter? Well, what's interesting is when salts go through the nose, they're regulated in this country as cosmetics or as cleansers. And so you could, since there's no drug here, you could get right into human testing, which we did. And it worked, actually, and we did then many studies. We brought out a hacked product, which had these salts, hypertonic salts, that go right here into your larynx, and sold a lot here in the United States, but just continued to do studies. We had very little marketing. We were really trying to figure out really what's going on here and how important is this. And so we've done about 8 human studies. And many of them in India. So because of the pandemic and the severity of the pandemic, and because of the kind of the primitive nature of a salt solution and the ability maybe to bring that to people everywhere, it began to be used in India, and particularly in Bangalore. There was an amazing medical doctor who was doing trials, and the pandemic took a really bad turn in the spring, and she then was hospitalized on oxygen ventilator, vaccinated. 4 of her PCR lab technicians died, and so it was just a horrible thing. She decided, we're going to start a phase 2 trial. We're going to start treating people with this salt solution, and did a phase 2 random control study with the nasal saline. And it turned out just in a few days, you eliminated symptoms, you pretty much eliminated rescue therapy, and you raised oxygen, which was really surprising, actually. And so we've spent many months trying to figure it out, and are just now publishing the results from a few continents of clinical data. So we've learned a lot, and generally what we've learned is that hydrating your upper airways is really critical to lower respiratory tract disease, including COVID-19. And I say all of that to say that the kind of the eureka moment, which connects those two pictures from the field in Africa to this hospital in Bangalore, was this recognition that this sort of trajectory led to something that really could change lives. And I just came back from Switzerland, where we met with the WHO and are preparing a process of trials in 3 regions in this developing world to seek WHO support of a new hygiene intervention. That could go then to developing world countries, not in a form factor like this, but in a really industrial kind of, very simple means of hydrating airways in places that are not getting vaccinated. So this final form came out a week ago. Seeing that this actually worked, partnered with Robert Brunner, who was the lead designer at Apple years ago and did the Beats by Dr. Dre. And it just came out, and we sold it out in 10 days. And so now, if you go to the website, we're kind of scaling up and everything like that. And so I say all of this to say that at my stage and at my age, failure is not just my teacher, it's my friend. It's done more for me than any success I've ever had. And success actually feels very different than it did probably when I was most of your ages. I kind of felt like success was mine when I was young. At this point, success feels like a big sort of confirmation about kind of how we all sort of work together. And so thank you very much, and good luck.
That was David Edwards, everybody. So we all did different stuff during the pandemic, right? So some of us created companies that now have traction with the WHO. Some people got really good at baking. If you're looking for someone to drop the link in the chat, no one faster. That is my special skill. So there's room for all kinds of successes on this stage as well. If you have any questions for David or any of our speakers, up on the screen here you see QR code that you can scan. You can ask the question, it will come to us virtually, and then we can answer it in the Q&A. So please keep your questions coming. Okay, our next speaker tonight is Jennifer Cohen. And when I asked her what's something about you that's not on your resume, she said she is a master rummy cub player. Please welcome Jennifer Cohen.
Oh my God, thank you. Hi, everybody. This is, of all the people to follow, I did not want to follow you. I feel this is going to be much lighter than what you do. So anyway, thank you guys. I'm really excited to be here. And, I feel like I've literally failed at almost everything I've tried. And yet still I'm standing here in front of you guys today. I wanted to start by telling you guys a story about myself when I was about 18 years old. I can't tell because the lights are so bright how many of you guys are even going to understand what I'm even talking about. But when I was 18 years old, I was still living in my hometown of Winnipeg, Manitoba, in Canada, with my parents in my first year of university. And I had this dream that I wanted to be a VJ for Much Music. And I don't know if you guys even know what that is, but it's like Much Music is like the MTV of America, and a VJ is like what Carson Daly would be if you guys have. I'm aging myself here, but hopefully you guys can kind of get the idea of what I'm talking about. And the job at the time was such a cool job that everybody wanted it, right? And I had this idea. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to get this job. And at the time, Keanu Reeves was the biggest star on the planet. The biggest. He just finished Speed and Point Break. Again, I know I'm probably dating myself, but not John Wick. That's now, or Matrix. But he really wanted to be a Shakespeare serious actor. So he came to Winnipeg, Manitoba to do Hamlet. And it was like the biggest news in the world because he was a huge star coming to a small town. And so I had this idea. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to get Keanu to be on my demo tape for Much Music, and that's how I'm going to get this job. And I told my parents, and I told my friends, I went to school, and I told everybody. And literally, everyone just laughed at me. This is who I am, by the way. I'm a professional failure. And they're like, yeah, whatever. And I was really, really serious about this. And so I decided that I'm going to go and wait for Keanu outside the doors of the Manitoba Theatre Center where he was doing Hamlet and, ask him. And I try to coerce anybody to come with me. And I should tell you guys, if you guys don't know what Winnipeg is like in the winter, it is literally the coldest place on the planet. It's minus 50 sometimes. If you don't have the proper clothing, you just get frostbitten. So I bring my friend, one girl, I had to pay her, I think. And literally I had to pay her. I think I gave her $10 to come with me. And she lasted 7 minutes. After 7 minutes, she's like, you know what, I'm leaving, it's not worth it, goodbye. And I was literally by myself outside the doors waiting, hopefully for Keanu Reeves to come out the door. And an hour passes, and then an hour and 20 minutes, and then an hour and a half, and 2 hours go by. And finally, he comes out of the door, and there are cameras and media everywhere. And so I just kind of went with the media. I just, sashayed in there. Finally went through all the crowds, and I tapped him on the shoulder, tugged on his jacket, and I said, Keanu. And he was very distracted and was really put off and looked at me. And he's like, I'll give you an autograph. Just wait your turn. And I was like, autograph? What do I want your autograph for? No. I really need your help. I really need your help. I need you to help me make a demo tape. And he was like, huh? And I was seriously convicted. I'm like, I really need this. And he looked at me, he's like, why don't you just give me your phone number and I'll call you. And he was signing favorites, all these autographs. And so I was like, are you really gonna call me? I'm questioning him, and he was like, I'll call you. And some girl gave me her eyeliner, and I had a gum wrapper, and I write my number with this eyeliner, and I give it to him. I'm like, you promise you're gonna call me? You promise? He's like, yeah, whatever. And so I'm like, all right, well, I go home. I go to school the next day. I tell everybody, and of course, everyone laughs at me, Jennifer, and no call. And then the second day I go to school, and I say the same thing, and my friends were all like, yeah, did Keanu call you? Yeah. And I'm like, no, he didn't call me yet. And the third day happened, same thing. And then the fourth day, you got it, same thing happens. And I go home, and my mom says to me, did you hear the answering machine? Did you listen to your messages? And again, I'm dating myself. We had answering machines back then. And I was like, no. And I go listen, and I hear my mom on my answering machine, and I hear hello. And because at the time, it's an answering machine. And I hear, hello, is Jennifer there? And then my mom's like, hello, who is this? And some man's on the phone, and he's like, hi, my name's Keanu. Is Jennifer there? And my mom's like, she's at school, call back. And she hangs up the phone, it's completely not even paying attention. Thankfully, he calls back again, and I'm listening to this message in hysterics, right? And he says, hi, Jennifer. I met you the other night. You were saying something, and you had such conviction, but I don't know what you were talking about. Here's my number. Call me back. Cut to, I call him back after I calmed myself down. And next thing you know, he is literally on my sofa in Winnipeg, dorky little me with my frizzy hair, and my mom made him cookies. I went to pick him up in my mom's Buick. And he comes over, and I had all my friends around the room, and they all had amateur cameras, so I can edit it together and make this great tape, and all that stuff. And here it is. And so I then had, what do you think? A great demo tape, right? A great demo tape. And what do you think happened? Did I get a call from Much Music after I gave it in? Well, I'll tell you, yes, I did. I got a call from Much Music, and did I get an audition? Yes, I got an audition. And then did it come down to even closer and closer? Absolutely. But did I get the job? No, I did not get the job. But I did not get the job, but there's a reason why I'm telling you this story. But you're probably thinking, well, why? You like failed, you didn't get it, you went through all this trouble, you made a fool of yourself, but you know? But no, it was an extremely pivotal moment for me, because in that moment, it taught me something about what true success is, and that is that boldness is a much stronger indicator for success than actually brilliance. And, you know, the truth is, bold people can still be brilliant, and brilliant people can still be bold. But the truth is, boldness is the secret sauce, and boldness is the thing that takes you on the path to success. See, when you're so smart, you tend to overthink everything, and you can think of all of the negative outcomes that can happen if things go wrong. So you don't take action. But bold people think of all of the positive potential things that can go right. So they do. So I guess when you think to yourself, what does it mean to be bold? Bold to me means you chase what you want and you don't just take what you get. And unfortunately, most people live on default because they have fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of looking stupid, and it's a lot of self-doubt. So what happens is they acquiesce to what's convenient, they take what's in front of them, and they don't necessarily take the shot. So that's why we get stuck in jobs that we don't want, because we don't actually apply or go after the job that we want. We go on to Indeed or Monster, if that even exists still, it doesn't, LinkedIn, and we see what's available versus going after that exact job that we really want. And guess what? That's why we don't make as much money as we would like to make, because we don't even ask for it. There was a survey done with over 160,000 people who believed they deserved a raise. And really, most of them didn't even ask for it. 2/3 of those people didn't even ask for a raise. But the people that did ask, over 70% actually got the raise. So you don't, of course, the answer will always be no if you don't even ask the question. So again, what is bold to me? Bold is chasing what you want, not just taking what you get and living on default. Now, people misunderstand what it means to be bold. People think that you're either born with boldness or you're not. And the truth is, that's just not true. Boldness is a skill like anything else. If you want to get super strong and get a six-pack, do you go to the gym one time and then go home? No. If you want to learn a language, if you want to learn French, Mandarin, Chinese, do you take one lesson and then say, you don't speak fluent after that? If you want to run a marathon, if you want to run the Boston Marathon, do you just run a lap around the school and then say, okay, you know what, I'm going to go into the Boston Marathon? No, it takes practice. The more practice you have, the better you get at something. And that's why I want to talk to you about a mindset that I developed called the 10% target. Now, the 10% target is a super simple thing. You make 10 attempts at whatever the thing is you want most in life, but you must make 10 attempts. See, people don't make 10 attempts. Most people don't even make one attempt because they count themselves out before even trying. They don't even give themselves that option. You have to get comfortable with failing 90% of the time. Because this is what I know. If you do the 10% target, one of two things is going to happen. Either you're going to get that thing you want, or another opportunity will present itself that you never knew existed. I mean, it is literally to a T, I guarantee it. Now, you need to get comfortable with that 90%. So the question is, how do you get comfortable failing 90% of the time? And just how you train your body to be fit, you can train your brain to be bold. You can reprogram your brain. That's a superhuman quality that we all have. You can do a new behavior over and over again, which becomes your new normal. And you just need to do it. Just talking is not enough. Reading about it is not enough. Deliberating about it is not enough. You need to actually execute and practice the failing. You got to get comfortable with failing. Now, I have a whole thing here I was going to do about all the colossal failures that I've done, because there's been many, many. I literally have a master's in failing, but because of this 10% target, I have a PhD in getting right back up. Because the truth is, the 10% target, oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. The 10% target works literally 100% of the time. I mean, I'm going to tell you, I was not the best student. I was not MIT, nor even MTT. And I was not the best athlete or the prettiest girl. But I will tell you something. I still was able to write best-selling books, sell numerous companies as an entrepreneur for millions of dollars. I was able to start a charity raising millions of dollars for breast cancer, which is a charity close to my heart, all by failing 90% of the time. And so can you. You can fail 90% of the time, too, by asking for what you want, because that's training your brain, and that's chasing what you want. But failing doesn't make you a failure, and rejection is always better than regret. That's it. Thank you.
That was Jennifer Cohen, everybody. I am like the living proof of Jennifer's theorem, right? Like, I went out on 8 weeks of miserable hikes, and then it worked. So there you go, 10% of the time I got there. I also wish I had like a Bill and Ted time machine so I could go and see Keanu in Hamlet in Winnipeg. To Keanu or not to Keanu. I mean, and I like to think that we bring everything to the stage here at Fail. Like, you come here for different reasons. Maybe you come here because you want to hear like your favorite person speak. Maybe you come here because you're just curious. But I bet you didn't know that you could come here for confirmation that Keanu Reeves is the sweetest man on the planet. So we bring it all for you here tonight. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Okay, we are midway through our program, so we thought we'd have a little bit of fun. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to read out some fails. And if you have experienced that failure yourself, we want you to stand up. And I'm going to be standing throughout because I've done all of these. So please join me so I'm not the only person. Please stand up if you've ever applied for a job that you did not get. Yeah, guys. Okay. Please stay standing if you've ever failed a class, a test, or a paper. Ooh, we added some more people. Okay. Please remain standing if you've ever sent a text to someone that you didn't mean to send the text to. Oh, yeah, okay, we got a few more. Okay. Please remain standing if you've ever had a paper rejected. Okay. There's still time, guys. Don't worry. You're early in your careers. Please stand if you've ever applied for a grant that you did not get. Okay. Again, there's still time for all of you. Don't worry. And finally, please remain standing if you have ever replied all when you didn't mean to. Well, hey, everybody. It's good to see you in person. All right. Thank you so much. Please sit down. That felt like a hug. Thanks. All right. We are so proud to welcome our next speaker to the stage. MIT provides an open and inclusive space for the creative and respectful exchange of ideas. Sometimes sensitive content during a presentation could be difficult to process and could result in some unexpected emotional reactions. We encourage everyone in this room to create an atmosphere of mutual respect and sensitivity. Our next presentation has some content that might be difficult for some people to hear. Please don't hesitate to take care of yourself in any way that feels appropriate during this talk. If you need to leave, no one's going to mind, especially our speaker. We encourage you to take advantage of the multiple MIT resources thereafter, and information on how you can access those resources will be shared after this talk. Our next speaker tonight is J.D. Schramm. And when I asked him, what's something about you that's not on your resume, he said that his undergraduate degree was in theater, but he never got cast in a show until the second to last semester. Please welcome J.D. Schramm.
It landed like a gut punch to me. I was in a Zoom meeting with my boss, who was the former president of Stanford, and just a month before, he had given me a performance review for my first year on the job reporting to him. And it wasn't a stellar performance review, but it was all stuff that he and I agreed I could work on. In fact, at one point in that conversation, he said to me, JD, you're harder on yourself than I would ever be on you. Work on these things and let's have a great second year. But less than 5 weeks later, I was in another Zoom conversation with him because we're in the midst of the pandemic, and it became clear to me that we were no longer on the same page. In fact, I questioned if we were even in the same book in terms of how we looked at leadership. I'd been hired to create a leadership development program for what was Stanford's version of Rhodes Scholars, and my vision and his vision of what leadership looked like were really becoming clear that they were very different. But his name was on the outside of the building, and he was the one who had raised the money for the program that was named after him. And it was clear to me that this was not a battle that I was going to be able to win. And so after several long conversations over the next few weeks, I made the decision to leave what I thought was the dream job. In fact, I probably said too many times, this is the last cover letter of my life when I applied for it. And so reluctantly, I stepped on September 1st of 2020 into the ranks of unemployment. And this period of unpaid sabbatical, as I like to call it, gave me time to reflect on all that mattered to me and what did really drive me and what was important to me. And I will acknowledge quickly, I was blessed. My husband and I decided together that I didn't need to rush into the next job opportunity. And I took time to take classes, I got certified as a crisis counselor for the crisis text line. I volunteered on the election. I ran one of the polling sites in San Francisco. And I began to do a lot more time with my kids, who were home quite a bit of the time, my 3-year-old and my 6-year-old. And through this period of rebounding or resilience to the loss of the dream job, I began to see other things were possible for myself. And so what I chose to talk about today inside of the theme here at Vail is that resilience is a muscle that you can exercise, that you can develop, much like you were saying, but it's a muscle you should develop before you need it. Don't wait until you are in the crisis that you need to use the resilience, but build it before you get there. Actually, I'll compare this to one of my friends when I was doing my MBA at NYU. We were going to a networking event one time, and Kush and I got in the elevator to go up to the 10th floor for this event, and somebody else joined us in the elevator. I don't know this guy, but I remember him saying, "Oh, you're going to the networking event. I've so got to do this because I lost my job today." And Kush looked at him and said, "You don't need to network. You needed to do that 6 months ago. You need to go find a job." And so you really got to build that muscle of resilience before you need it. The author Meg Jay, who wrote the Defining Decade, she talks about the best time to work on your marriage is before you're in a marriage. And the same thing with resilience. The best time to work on it is before you need to exercise that muscle. So to make this easier for you, I've come up with 3 to-dos and 3 to-don'ts to help you build that muscle of resilience. On the to-do side, nurture relationships in an analog fashion. Now I'm dating myself. Nurture relationships that don't rely on technology, that you don't have to be on Instagram or WhatsApp or Facebook or whatever to connect with those people. I have a friend, actually somebody who I volunteer with at the crisis text line, and she called me the other day. I had never heard her voice before. We had always communicated only via text and when we were on the app volunteering together. And we had a phone conversation. Cultivate relationships in your life that are analog. The second to do is practice gratitude daily. Now, you can decide what this looks like for you. There's a couple of practices that I've used from time to time. One is before I send an email in the morning, the first email that I send is an acknowledgement of something that happened the day before. And that's like my ticket to allow me to go into my inbox and start handling all the other emails that are there. If that doesn't work for you, just look for somebody through the day that you think probably hasn't gotten thanked or acknowledged as much as they should. For me, I had 2 people like that. One was my Uber driver who drove me here to 77 Mass Avenue in the rain. And I was like, this is not a fun job today, is it? And I thanked him, and I thanked him with eye contact and genuinely acknowledging that he made it possible for me to get here from Logan. And then the third step that is one of the to-dos that I encourage you to put into place is to have a way to capture your dreams in front of you. Now, my husband and I, we love to do vision boards. Other people like to journal. Other people have digital, like a screensaver that is the dreams of what it is you want to accomplish, or the places you want to go, or the awards that you want to achieve, or the jobs you want to have. But have something in your vision that you see on a regular basis that reminds you of what you're committed to. So those are some of the to-dos that will give you resilience. The to-don'ts: avoid toxic people. If you are in a toxic relationship, be it a romantic relationship, be it an employment, be it an advisor, if you are in a relationship that is toxic, you need to step out of it. You need to find another way to have that need met in your life. It is not going to change. It is not going to get better. It's like when you have sour milk and you're like, oh, I'll put that back in the fridge for a couple more weeks and see if it... No. If it's a toxic relationship, step away and avoid having toxic people in your life. Second, reduce, or if you can, eliminate relying on artificial substances to bring you joy. Be that drugs or alcohol or shopping or sugar or caffeine. If there is something that you find yourself relying on too heavily to bring you that joy or to take you away from the life that you're leading, that's an indication that that's probably something you need to reduce or eliminate. And third, eliminate the "I've got this, don't worry." Too many of us, when we hit those hard moments, act like we've got it all together. And we're afraid to acknowledge that we need help. That false bravado actually can be our undoing. And so I invite you to eliminate that attitude of "I've got this" and be vulnerable enough to let somebody know you need help. Whether it's somebody directly in your life or it's somebody anonymously through a phone line or a text line or a counselor that you can see. Now, we did a warning before I started talking, because a part of my journey is that I am a survivor of a very serious suicide attempt. In 2003, I went through a very dark night of the soul, and at that moment, I did not think that life was worth living. And I am one of the few people who has survived from leaping off of the Manhattan Bridge. I failed at a very serious suicide attempt, and I was put back together, both physically, emotionally, and spiritually, by people who were more committed to my life than I was. And I am forever grateful for what happened to me after that really, really, really bad choice. And you do not need to make a choice like I did. If my recovery from depression and suicide were a person, it would be able to vote now. It would be 18 years old. And in that 18 years, I have done a whole lot of work. First, interior work on myself, and then exterior work on the relationships that matter in my life, so that I can be here today talking about failure in a way that hopefully brings some hope and some access to avenues that people don't realize are available to them. I am not defined by my failed suicide attempt. I am defined by the life that I have created since that moment. And that life includes a husband and 3 children who I adore, and it's really hard to be away from them for 2 nights so that I can be here with all of you. And a body of work that I am proud of at Stanford and at several other institutions, and a life that is about sharing my journey so that if some of my mistakes, some of my failures can help you on your journey. Thank you. We did want to provide these resources, so this is a great photo to grab with your phone, or if you're watching this online, a screenshot to capture, so that you know that you're not alone in this and that there are resources available. Thank you.
I don't have any slides. Here.
Is it? Let's try now. That was J.D. Schramm, everybody. One more time. That was an absolutely amazing and beautiful story. Thank you so much. It's really important to all of us here at Fail that we make space for all of these kinds of stories, and that was a beautiful and moving story. I think it will stay with me for a long time, so thank you so much. Our next speaker tonight is Professor Rose Picard, and when I asked her what is something about you that is not on your resume, she let me know that she is perhaps the most MIT person you can imagine. She met her husband in a computer room on a Friday night at MIT, and her 2 sons are current undergraduates at MIT. Please welcome Professor Rose Picard.
Thank you. Now you all know where to go after this event, if you're single. Failure, in the way I think about it, is a midpoint, not the end point. I'm going to share 3 segments from my life where, as I reflect on failure, these were very memorable failures for me. The first was, picture myself as a 3rd grader. We had just moved from Iceland to the United States, and I was the whitest kid you could imagine down south. I did not fit in. I didn't really know how to fit in. And while my first report card had all S's for satisfactory on the academics, I had the equivalent of an F, a U for unsatisfactory, in what was called show and tell. I don't know how many of you had to do show and tell. I was supposed to bring in an object to show to everybody and stand up and tell about it. and I dreaded show and tell. I used to fake stomach aches, hide my object, lose my object, everything I could to get out of show and tell. One day the teacher said, Rosalind, you are getting out of your desk and you are telling the class about something even though you didn't bring anything in. In fact, she had called my mom to make me bring something in. My mom said, oh, take this little candle in and call it a taper and show it to everybody. And I had managed to hide it under a bush on the way in once again. This time, I was forced out of my desk and I stood there in front of everybody, and the silence was deafening. I could just hear my heart beating. And then the laughter started. And the laughter started quiet, and it got louder. And I just imagined growing humiliation until I realized that they weren't looking at me. They were looking at a little something that had just started walking across the floor. It was the funniest little thing I'd ever seen before. It had all these legs. It was a giant centipede. And they were looking and pointing and laughing at the centipede. And for the first time in my life, standing in front of everybody, I felt like I could relax. It wasn't about me. It was about the centipede. And I was able to mumble something about the centipede. They clapped. I sat down, and I was so relieved. I had just passed my first show and tell, and also, I guess, my first impromptu public speaking. Now, it wasn't about me, and reminding myself over and over when things are really so scary that I'm doing everything I can to not be bold and go into them is a very powerful help for me in getting past big failures. Segment 2, I went off to Georgia Tech. I loved college. I loved studying electrical engineering, computer engineering. I loved the technical stuff so much, I took all of my for fun electives in nuclear astrophysics and stellar evolution. I really was in my element. In fact, I loved it so much that I didn't sleep. Since then, we've done research on sleep at MIT, and those MIT students actually sleep on average more than 7 hours. And if you sleep on average more than 7 hours and have regular sleep, you have much better mental health, morning alertness, happiness, and other features like you're probably nicer to be around. It wasn't that nice to be around. And I didn't realize what I was doing to myself. It's like I wasn't, it's not that I thought I was invincible, it's that I just didn't think. I didn't think about what I was doing to myself. And fortunately, I had an amazing roommate and great friends who used to meet and gather from very diverse backgrounds to study the best-selling book of all time. And so best-selling that it's not even on the bestseller list because it would be #1 every week. So we would meet and study the Bible. And in that, I found great challenge, wisdom, and inspiration that allowed me to start thinking more of others before myself, and also start taking care of myself. And that made a big difference. And while I still try to read it and I fail at implementing a lot of what it recommends, I find great peace and inspiration and joy in those attempts that help me through a lot of challenges today. Fast forward, third segment. Third segment is I'm struggling to finish my PhD at MIT. I had gotten married at this point, and my husband used to say, be polite, never ask somebody how many years they have before they finish their PhD. Toward the end, everybody's getting their papers accepted, mine's rejected, but I finally, I just always felt like there was too much to do and I couldn't get it all done. It was suggested by my faculty advisor that I apply for a faculty position at a nearby Ivy League school. I thought that was pretty cool. I applied, rejected so quickly. They didn't even give me an interview or a job talk. I said, fine, I'm perfectly happy not even thinking about applying for a job because I have a lot of work to do. I don't know if I'm ever gonna be able to finish this thesis. And then they invited me to apply at MIT. And you can probably tell from my title that I made it to that job talk. And have been at MIT on the faculty since 1991. Now, I wasn't so happy later when I made it all the way through. I was happy when I made it through tenure, but when I got promoted all the way to the top, they told me I was the first woman in the school to get promoted from the bottom to the top. And honestly, that was kind of disappointing. I think that should not have been the case. But there were a lot of challenges to get where I am today, and a lot of struggles. For example, when I was getting started, I was challenged by Jerry Wiesner, one of the former presidents of MIT and science advisor to John F. Kennedy, that he said the most important thing you can do as pre-tenure faculty at MIT is to take risks. Now, I thought I had liked to skydive. I had become quite a risk taker. But in my academic career, I was really worried about being accepted, about being respected, about being a woman in engineering who people took seriously. And I was sticking to being sort of the most mathematical person in my area, thinking at MIT that's what works to be taken seriously. As I took his challenge to heart, and our group rearranged to be the perceptual computing group, I started reading outside of my computer vision mathematical modeling work into work on how the brain works to perceive lots of other information. And I read a book about a man who tasted shapes. When he tasted soup, he felt points in his hand. This chicken soup didn't have enough points, so he'd add more seasoning and feel when it tasted right. And I was intrigued by this because we were trying to figure out how we could build a computer that worked like our brain to perceive information. And in the studies of synesthesia, this union of the senses, Richard Saitowick, the author of this book, found that the key activity, the heightened perceptual activity, was not happening in the visual cortex or the auditory cortex, these regions of the brain that we were trying to build computers to represent. It was happening deeper down, subcortically, in a region of the brain involved with memory, emotion, and attention. And I wanted to learn more about this. And I knew memory and attention were important. I did not want to have anything to do with emotion, right? That would be the kiss of death for all of my serious effort. First, I don't know who's laughing, but they must know that I went on to unfortunately discover that emotion was, there was lots of great neuroscience showing how important emotion was, not just for perception, but for just about everything I had been looking at in AI, for decision-making, for action selection, for language, for if you wanted to build a robot to interact socially with people. Emotion seemed to be a very important missing link. Now, I thought, okay, I'll get some guys to work on this. Men working on emotion. That will be taken more seriously. One failure after another after another. I remember talking to a colleague, very respected speech signal processing person who, in engineering, if you're extroverted, you look at the other person's feet. And he was looking at my feet, and he was saying, Rosalind, don't waste your time. Emotion is a waste of time. It's just noise. And I gave some arguments why I thought it wasn't. And I tried to convince people. And and the laughter of my third grade experience was not directed at the centipede this time, but at the topic that I was proposing. I wrote a paper on it, submitted it to a more visionary journal, and it was rejected with the most humiliating reviews I've ever read. They said it read like a flight magazine. I then started to finally we were starting to get some real data and real objective measurements. I wanted to bring real engineering rigor to this topic, and we started doing measurement there that led to some real mathematical papers that were more in the vein of what I was used to. Submitted it to the first conference on pattern recognition, and it was rejected there too. They said it didn't fit this conference. They forgot they had pattern recognition in the title. They said it's not computer vision. It's not computer vision of emotion. So I thought, okay, I'm going to try a different tact. I'm going to put the title of the conference in the paper. So the next paper was on digital affective signal processing, and it went to the Digital Signal Processing Conference. Guess what? It got accepted. They couldn't say it didn't fit. Same for the affective wearables paper. And then because getting published was excruciatingly slow and my tenure clock was ticking, and I was in the media lab where they encouraged crazy things, I wrote a book called Affective Computing, which led to what is today a whole field called affective computing. I had no idea it was going to even just not get totally laughed off of the shelves. And today there's a IEEE Journal of Transactions of Affective Computing and International Society, international conferences. And people who laughed about what I was doing at those conferences have come back to me and asked for my data, and they're working on it now too. So I stuck with something that the science was showing me was important, even though it involved overcoming a lot of fear of being laughed at and moving forward. In the end, I think that failure is a midpoint. It's not a destination. And you can push through it, keeping your eye on something that's greater than yourself. And I believe that there is something much greater than all of us that gives our lives purpose and meaning, and gives our failures sometimes even greater purpose and meaning than we can ever imagine. And sometimes we don't see it. Sometimes we're looking for something big. But sometimes that purpose and meaning works through very little things, even a little centipede. Thank you.
That was Rosalind Picard, everybody. Hot tip, put the name of the conference in your paper. That is a good one for the ages. And I don't know about you, but when I heard this story and Rosalind said that she saw the centipede coming towards her and she felt this sense of calm, that would not be my reaction. Since moving to North America, I find the centipede the most terrifying animal. It's the legs, they're too long. They could be hairs. Are they leggy hairs? Are they hairy legs? We'll never know. So I am very impressed by everything about Rosalind, but especially the fact that she's not scared of centipedes. So, please keep your questions coming. We have a QR code here and a QR code here, and we're going to get set up right now for our Q&A.
I thought, oh no, I can't end on an insect now. But fortunately, we're far apart. There's space for many insects. It was a great setup.
All of the speakers to come and join me up on stage. Thank you. Okay, you're sitting right next to me, so I'm going to throw the first question to you, Jennifer. So this question for you is, what is your recommendation for someone who isn't sure what they want? How can they identify what they want and act boldly towards that goal?
It's a good question. I think the best way to figure out what you want is to try a lot of things to figure out what you don't want. So it depends on exactly, is there a specific area, or is it professionally, is it just overall?
I think however you want to interpret it.
I think what I've done and what I tell people all the time is that you've got to try a lot of stuff. So let's say, for example, I'm going to use a basic thing like fitness or exercise, right? You can try so many different, if I say to you the best thing to do is running, but you hate running, you're never going to do it. So you should try as many different exercises as possible to figure out which one you like best so you'll actually do it. That can go with your profession, that can go with anything in life. Because I'm really all about action, right? The best way to figure out anything is to actually act on it, right? And, action begets more action, and it's momentum, right? Like something in motion stays in motion. So that is what I always say to people. Just try as many things as possible and, do the 10% target.
Go on those 8 miserable hikes, for sure. JD, you're next. I have a question that came in for you. They said, what do you think was missing all those years ago, and were there not as many resources available then as there are now?
I think one element that was really missing was transparency and honesty. I tried so hard to make it look like I had it all together, and I didn't have enough people that I was just transparent and vulnerable with about the struggles. I think had that been the case, it would not have gone as deep and dark as it did for me. And then with that, I think, which I saw in my recovery, but having what I called for me a dream team that helped me put things back together, that I knew that I needed to rely on others' expertise, and that was a gap in my life before that point.
Thank you. David, a question for you. Alexander Fleming's discovery of penicillin. This is a very MIT question. Alexander Fleming's discovery of penicillin came as a result of him being in the open mode and having curiosity about one of his cultures that didn't grow. If he was in the closed mode, the culture that didn't grow would have been an error to be thrown away. But he was open to failure and resulted in a remarkable discovery. Do you have guidance on modulating between open and closed mode in the world of innovation?
So I'm super sorry that I'm not sure that I'm hearing you perfectly right. So I think, so the question about open and closed mode in penicillin, so I think could you just put it in your own words, actually just say the question one more time?
Yeah, in the world of innovation,
Yes.
how do you modulate between being open to different mistakes and also, I guess, being closed off and, like, I would imagine, focused on
so good.
what
Okay,
you're
great.
looking
So
for?
this is probably not going to be a perfect answer to the what was probably a very sophisticated question, but just to say, I think that when it comes to innovating, you're best to begin at a pretty closed mode where you're really focused on what you know and what is really immediate to you, and not to look around too much at what other people have thought about this particular issue, or, it's such a big, complicated world, but just to simplify your life a lot so that you're analyzing what you know super, super well, because what you know, nobody else knows, because that's you. And even if it's like the next wheel, if you're thinking about it and it's sort of solving an issue that you're dealing with, then it's unique. And at some point, if you go for another, with my students, I always encourage them to go super far in inventing the next wheel before they look online and see that, oh, by the way, that was figured out a long time ago. And then by the time they look up and, oh my God, this was like invented like a long time ago. Actually, if you look at what they've got and it's actually not exactly the same thing. And so I think that there's you learn, and this gets back to kind of how do you figure out what you want to do. You do need to try, and you need to have experiences. You have to have a chance to kind of, so you sort of learn when is the right moment to look up. And it does have a lot to do with failure, actually, but so I'm not sure if that's exactly the best answer to, or even what your question was, but hopefully that's helpful.
We'll take it, thank you. Rosalind, you mentioned, is it what? Yes, okay. Rosalind, you mentioned that being the first woman to make it bottom top at MIT was disappointing. And how do you think the situation has changed? Has it improved significantly, or is there like a way to go? And what has been done so far?
Yeah, I think the key thing is now, like, our undergrads are half female, half male, right? We have gender balance now, and I think that it's just changing. I also, these days there's kind of this victim mentality to like look for all the ways things aren't working. I encourage you to look for all the ways things are working. Like, don't accentuate those differences. Just really find your passion and go after. I actually would give the exact opposite advice of you, like explore, find what you love and really do a great job learning about it and trying to push it forward. So I'm big on giving people opportunities and passion, and if you see something wrong, call it out, but by and large assume the best of people.
I love that 50% pipeline that's coming our way. That's good news. A reminder, you can still ask questions. They are coming live to me on this iPad because this is MIT. So feel free, if you have more questions, keep them coming. A question for all of you. Which other speaker's story can you relate to, and have you experienced similar failures? And I'll leave this to anyone would like to jump in.
Actually, I've never. So your story is obviously super moving, and I honestly have had one moment in my life where I thought to end my life, and it was here actually, and I came from a really simple background and clean carpets to go to community college, and ended up at MIT by total serendipity, probably unlike pretty much everybody else in this audience. And I got deeply into what I did. I was doing applied math and wrote books early on. And I was super happy, actually, and just in my little small world. And I finally met the woman who I was going to marry, and I needed to get a job. And so I was fabulously in love, and I got a job offer at the University of California, Santa Barbara. And the state ran out of money that year, and so I got this call, and it was like, well, it can't happen. And so I'm 3 months from getting married, I didn't have a job, and I took it super personally, like it was, how could this possibly be? And I remember walking near the river, and what helped me. Actually, I shouldn't be telling the story. I'm going to get emotional, actually, but just say what helped me. I had it was a very dark moment, and I said to the woman who became my wife, who was actually an MIT student also, that, I don't know what to do with my life, actually. I think I like books a lot, and so, maybe I'll just be like a librarian. She said, you know what, I'd love you as a librarian.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Can I jump on that? You're reminding me of something that helped me when I was a struggling student at MIT, wondering, when am I ever even going to have time to think about a job? And I used to keep back, before we had smartphones and stuff, in a little written booklet, things like, I could be a librarian, I could be a grade school teacher, I could be a list of all these other things that I could be happy being, just so I wouldn't get so stressed out if whatever it was that I decided to go for didn't work out.
I found something in each of the three talks that were motivating to me or touching to me. I have to apologize. I'm the one who laughed so hard that I threw off your pace there for a moment. And yet, for those of us who have chosen to work in academia, it can be challenging in ways, and I often hold out, and this has been attributed to a ton of different people, including Henry Kissinger, but that the battles in academia are so fierce because the stakes are so low. And as you were talking, I was thinking of sometimes we have these battles about stuff that don't matter. And then I come to an event like this and we have conversations about stuff that matters, and all of that happens inside of the academy. And so you need it all to create platforms like this, but sometimes it just feels silly. So that was some of my laughter. So.
Yeah, I feel like there's time to find levity in all of this as well. Jennifer, we have some questions for you. Have you ever failed at getting back up? And was there a specific moment when it was very hard to get back up?
So, yes, has there ever been a specific moment? So, because at such a young age, I will say that I'm more naturally prone to just, I let things kind of slide a little bit more, but I feel like, this is what I find very interesting. Like, I'm hearing all you guys speak, and there's like a beauty in like mediocrity and being average, because the pressure on you is not so much, right? Like I feel when you are like brilliant and a superstar, there could be so much pressure on like succeeding at such a high level that the failing is so much more dramatic and drastic. But when you're like me, and you're just like, like average at best, I feel like, you have to kind of, you naturally get conditioned to work harder, and you're kind of like more accustomed and used to failing a little bit more. So you give it a go more. So I feel like that's why I've like kind of like developed this entire mindset where I feel like if you have that, kind of mediocrity works for you, because you're forced to kind of like, figure out what you're good at and what you're bad at, and like the falls aren't so dramatic, right? So to answer the question, I feel like to that point, like I've failed so many times, but it never stopped me from really getting back up at some, like I never was down that long, because I think curiosity, and if you can hone curiosity at a young age as well, it helps you, because I'm constantly like interested in searching for other things. So if I'm down, all right, but if that door shut, well, maybe I can go through the window, and if the window's broken, maybe I can climb through the back and I can get through the attic. Like I'm always kind of figuring it out. So yes, too bad you guys aren't mediocre. I'm sorry, There's a real power to it. Yeah.
One thing that really like came out for me in the past couple years, where I was just sort of barely surviving, it felt like a lot of the time, with like little kids at home and just trying to make it work, was I set myself little goals, like things that I'm like, if I can do this, then it will feel good. And like, so I used to be a runner when I had kids, and I just wasn't anymore. So I was like, I'm going to do a 5K. And I did it. And it felt good. I did it dressed as a Ghostbuster for Halloween, which made it extra fun. And the other thing I achieved in the past couple of months was I wanted to finish the book Dune before I saw the movie. Did it. Did it. So proud. Thank you. It's very long. It's like 800 pages. So I'm curious, like for you guys, how does small achievable goals, is that something that resonates with you when you guys are working on bigger projects?
I'm only laughing because that's what I feel. Everything is about small wins to lead to success, right? I feel how you build confidence in the world and in life is by these small little incremental goals. And by putting, I think when you it becomes very daunting and overwhelming when you look at, when you look down the road too much. So for me, my first company I started was called No Gym Required, and that was about giving people simple and easy solutions. I'm staring at you, I shouldn't be. I'm just sitting around, like we're out for coffee, and I'm like very intimately talking to you. But, and that was all about giving people simple solutions that in health and fitness that they can integrate into their life very easily. And I made this shoe that was a weighted shoe, because then you can burn more calories and add the, kind of like increase the intensity by doing something you would already be doing, like walking. Because so much of my background was until I kind of pivoted, was in weight loss and in fitness, that when it was all about these small achievable wins. And it's about building the habits and the routine to kind of have longevity with them. So those little wins, you have longevity over time with them, because it becomes part of your habitual, it becomes part of your lifestyle. So yes, someone else, I don't mean to dominate over here, but.
I make your bed every morning. It's trivial, it's simple, and you start the day with a win. And then when you go to bed that night, it's just so much nicer to sleep in a bed that's been made. And so I don't remember where I got the advice, but I try to do that.
There's a book called Make Your Bed.
The author spoke at MIT, gave the commencement speech here.
I was thinking it was a commencement speech.
Yeah.
It's a huge New York Times bestseller.
Yeah. I think that, I think that also anyone who's doing pioneering work or of any kind is looking at step by step by step and really loves it, actually. And so I think part of the joy of a scientific career or any kind of a pioneering career is the satisfaction of that step-by-step process. You kind of know, actually, when someone is not a pioneer, when they're looking up too much, actually. It's actually a very intimate sort of make your bed kind of experience.
I'll add, I think it's helpful to, all of these are great advice, to think on the good things. And if you're having a hard time finding good things in your own life, like, you did bad on the test, but your roommate did well, or your paper was rejected, but your lab mate's wasn't, celebrate the joys with them. And it's a little hard and painful. You may feel a little jealous. I know I remember feeling that, and I was like, no, I need to celebrate the joy with them. And it's wonderful when you celebrate the joy with somebody else. It helps cement that friendship. You need friends, especially at MIT. I tell people you need to make sure that the number of your friends is more than your GPA. And one of the best ways to do that is to celebrate your friends' successes with them. Don't just say, yeah, congrats. Like, say, wow, that's great. How does that feel? And share the joy with them.
Thank you. I love that. I'm going to remember that one as I lose my friends over time as I age, more than my GPA. So there are moments in life, right, where we do need to take stock, pivot, walk away from something. So when we're talking so much about perseverance and keep going and you'll get there, how do you understand when it's time to make that change, walk away?
Okay. You know what? I think that a lot of times self-awareness is super key. It's so key. I think that knowing what you're good at and also knowing what you're bad at is really important, and playing into those strengths is really important. So, I feel right in this time, being an entrepreneur, for example, is a really sexy thing. Everyone wants to be an entrepreneur. Everyone thinks everyone says, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm an entrepreneur. But the truth is, not everyone's built out to be an entrepreneur. Maybe not in this crowd. They're going to be computer geniuses, maybe, but in my life. But I think, that's important, right? So you're playing towards your strength. You're doing what you naturally are good at. I think that's something to really kind of focus on for success, right? And overall success is I think that it's always important to play up your strengths and and then you can either forget it or farm it out, your weaknesses, to somebody else. I say fix it, forget it, or farm it out. That's what I say for my weaknesses, right? Thank you. So I just feel that's a way to know, you can try something. And I think it's I said earlier, it's very important to try a lot of different things. But I think being self-aware and being in touch with what, and being realistic with yourself and what you're good at, what you're not, and then leaning into that is super, super critical. That's my opinion.
Just to also address, there are circumstances where you're successful, but you're kind of not realizing your vision or your purpose. There are moments where you sort of say, well, why am I doing this? It's I can do it well, but why am I doing this? And I think that, well, we probably all have those moments. And and this has probably been said many times here, I think that having a purpose that transcends that step by step will help you a lot, and it will help people come around you and understand kind of where you're going. And there are moments it's like what I described, where you kind of feel this may be successful, but it's definitely not what the road that I thought I was on. And so I don't know if that's helpful.
Totally helpful. Thank you. Great setup. I completely agree. And I'm thinking of one major pivot I made when working on affective computing, working on affective state recognition, working on stress, trying to help kids on the autism spectrum who are non-speaking to communicate their stress. And suddenly, the biggest signal in our data turned out not to be a stressor, even though we had managed to get the biggest stress we could doing experiments at MIT. But the biggest signal turned out to be a kid having a seizure. And it was jumping out of the data. And I thought, I don't know anything about seizures. I don't know anything about epilepsy. I'm like Googling what's a seizure. And next thing I know, it feels like we need to pivot. My whole career is going this way. And we realized we might have something that could be saving lives here, but I didn't know anything about it. So there's this fear of, do I pivot to something that's like, I don't know anything? I'm like, that's a perfect setup for failure again, right? Haven't I failed enough? Like, do I have to fail again? But it turned out to be an amazing pivot. Actually, there's a whole TED talk on this particular set of findings that you can look up if you're interested. And today there's an FDA-cleared device out there because of this pivot that I'm hearing from families. It's helping save the life of children and loved ones.
Don't fear the pivot.
Don't be afraid.
Don't fear the pivot.
Be bold, like Jennifer said.
Be bold. We are almost out of time, so to wrap up, I want to ask you all to respond to this question, which is, what is the message that you would most want people to take home with tonight? I'm going to give you a beat to think about what that message might be. And I'm realizing I don't have the notes that I want to have with me, because while they're thinking about the message, I wanted to thank a whole list of people. And I don't have that note with me. Maybe, could you pass me the poster? I'm going to use the poster. We're going to be fine. I would like to thank everybody who sponsored this evening. That is the MIT Graduate Student Council, the MIT School of Science, the MIT Office of Graduate Education, the MIT Sandbox, Mind Hand Heart, MITEL, and MIT Vista. Thank you so much for making tonight happen. And thank you for everyone for rolling with my failures. Okay, so Jennifer, what is the one thing you would want people to take home with tonight?
Well, I said it in my little speech there, but I'm going to repeat it because I guess it's worth repeating. That, and I live by this motto, is that that regret is worse than rejection. So try things and go after things, chase what you want. Don't be afraid of failing. Remember, I have a PhD in it, of getting up. You can too. I think that to me is something that's really, really important. If I would really tell anybody something, it would be bold and go after it. What's the worst thing that can happen?
I would say what I said was build the muscle of resilience before you need it. And I would add to that, what we've seen tonight is seek joy in everything you do. The way that the organizing team could laugh about the tech issue at MIT of all places, the way that you can be comfortable not having just find joy in everything you're doing.
Well, not to just repeat what I've said before, I guess I would say that just reflected by the people sitting around me, I think that failure makes you much more interesting than success. That's all I'm going to say, yeah.
Yeah, and if you're feeling failure right now, if you're feeling despair or lack of hope, picture yourself in the midpoint on a journey. And there is greater meaning and purpose. And I hope it won't be long before it's turned back to joy for you.
Thank you. that is our event. Thank you so much to all of you for being here tonight. It is fantastic to be back in person. And a final thank you to all of our speakers. They were absolutely fantastic. Thank you for your time and for your generosity, and we hope to see you again. Thank you.